This real-side experience would begin with a scene which was very familiar, although my personal self hadn't experienced it this lifetime on the physical or on the real side, at least as far as my personal self can recall, for after all, even though the personal self can be shown mere glimpses and fractions of everything that's taking place in creation, as creation is rather big, considering all the ideas of the overall consciousness, in all their variation, that effect into creation's overall design, even these glimpses, these few ideas selected as that which makes the most sense for the personal self to be shown, in regards to heads-up warnings, situations on the real side that are to be shared so others can be apprised of developments, or indeed verifications of certain decided projects, galactic, etc., the dealings with all the aliens involved, and so forth. These glimpses, these ideas, which effect then simulated scenes according to the nature of the idea, like having a virtual reality headset for every idea in the consciousness overall available that can present the corresponding simulation to be viewed. The personal self can forget these glimpses on waking, just as readily as we might something that occurred on the physical. Everything is stored in the memory vehicles. Everything the personal self experiences in a simulated creation, like a large data storage area. But it's as though that which is experienced is stored momentarily in an easily accessible place, like having the immediate experience open as a website on our computer screens, and then as moments go by, the file, the idea, the memory of the experience gets rather transferred to the storage area, and no longer on the screen. We may retain a memory of it, but the details fade over time, as though the file, the web page, slowly fades from the screen over time, loses clarity, as opposed to just clicking off and it being gone in its entirety. Although this can occur also, we can instantly forget entirely something we had in our memory mere moments ago. Of course, then, that which sticks more so in the mind, that which takes time to fade from our computer screens, or maybe elements of it remain forever in our available memory files, would be such experiences, physical or real side, that were very intense and impacting. Hence the often over-exaggeration of real side experiences or activities that were not strictly necessary, like travelling through portals, whereas the real awareness could simply have inserted the created self and the subsequent view at the specific place that was to be shown to the personal self. No travelling via portals necessary. What has us forget experiences mostly is that we replace the focus on the experience with a focus on other ideas, and just like a computer then, this is the equivalent of switching to other web pages or sites and clicking off the previous one, the previous experience or idea that held our focus. So a technique to employ on waking just after a real side experience is to not engage with or create any other ideas, thoughts or emotions, to not activate that which is the consciousness, to not deliberate over all we must do during the day, but more so to remain with the experience, to run it through various times in our minds, like replaying a movie, while we sit in the nowness of the real awareness, aside from the consciousness of mind and emotions, and then we have the best chances of recollection. But even then, elements may be lost, as we have moved our awareness from an aside from the consciousness position while on the real side, unless we have remained in consciousness, the simulation that stems from the ideas it contains, and in this aside from consciousness position, as those on their process of awareness will generally more so always operate from this position, which is the nowness of the real awareness. Of course then, at the time of the experience, everything would have made more sense, as we would have our direct line and connection with our real awareness standing, as though, regardless of what we are experiencing, we have a steady flow of additional narration or subtitles, courtesy of real awareness impressions to draw upon, that afford us additional clarity than just what is visually occurring. A real awareness that is a part of this overall awareness, that is through all consciousness therefore, all the ideas of it that effect into all simulation throughout creation, and so the real awareness can read all ideas that are the foundation, the building blocks or files that make up everything this simulator comprises of, in every nowness new moment of the real awareness's true isness everything reality, and so can reveal much by way of interpretation of what we are experiencing, if we remain in the nowness of the real awareness, the only place where these impressions can be received. In the immersion of the personal self-consciousness only, all we have are the surface visuals as effected from the ideas as created from a particular personal self and consciousness, but ideas or files the personal self can't access, and so the full extent of what makes up what we visually see, the personal self alone can't determine, unless it has a greater consciousness capability, psychics, etc., who can see more deeply into a multi-dimensional creation, even from the position of the personal self-consciousness. And so the personal self alone can only draw conclusions based on what it has as references, that which it has already experienced or has learnt in regards to dream symbology and interpretation, but to lean to what we know, to remain with the personal self and our awareness as it currently stands. We are rather deciding to remain in that awareness position and not explore and become aware of more. As to be aware of more, we must step beyond from what we know or are aware of, that the personal self has collated, and be open to life and in a perpetual position of wanting to see, be more, and become aware of more, that an endeavouring to stand in the nowness of the real awareness would indicate such an intent and decision to do so. For if we step into the consciousness and remain there, we rather close the doors of the unknown, so to speak, shutting ourselves off from further awareness, that only through the real awareness standing and real intent can we be more aware of that which we currently are. And along with real side experiences, that of being shown creational happenings, experiences that have us become more aware through the recognition of what we are shown, a continued recognition that is really made so as we remove that which prevents us from being in these escalating positions of awareness, as ultimately the is a completeness. The real awareness we are is a part of this isness, so must be complete also. And what limits this completeness standing, this complete isness recognition, must be that which the real awareness, the personal self, the two selves decide as limitation. So in a way, it's as though we're not progressing or going forward in literal terms, but removing that which limits what we already are. We're more so going backwards or going inwards, and shedding the limiting layers which limit our recognitional positioning. And also we will have much real side experience by way of tapline agreement, attachment releasing, which are ideas through the consciousness that are collated as we go through our many lifetimes. All are stored as we proceed and automatically held to, agreed with, just like a computer that retains all the websites we have visited, all our computer activity, until we consciously decide to face it all and release these ideas, which would be like erasing our search history in a sense. The experiences are still there, as all experience of ideas makes up the consciousness as it is now. So if we erased the idea files, we rather dismantle the simulation as effected from it, like deleting the computer game we play from our computer. But it's more like we still operate in the game as effected from consciousness, but are not clinging to the ideas that make up its construction, which liberates us from being the unconscious effects of everything of creation. We are at more liberty to operate freely and multi-dimensionally, as we are unbound by ideas that present limitation, and ultimately with all ideas effaced and released, all agreements severed, we are not bound to any effects of assimilation any longer, and then a recognition of the ease has our process complete, the purpose of the simulators served, the simulators as the tool for is recognition, to recognize the everything reality from that which everything isn't, which are pieces and encapsulated, isolated parts, which can be experienced independently from the whole, the is, through the mechanics of creation, as these ideas can be created and contained in a consciousness effecting a simulation to be experienced. And when we face these old ideas and taplines, we can have much by way of imagery, scenes and situations associated with the lifetimes, the moments these agreements were originally made, featuring on the real side as a past lifetime flashbacks, etc., which really there is no past, present, or future, there is just the consciousness with all the ideas decided that makes up its construction, all present in every nowness, isness moment. Ideas that as we face, so spins off the corresponding simulation as processed through the mechanics of creation, as the various time and distance additional ideas have been decided and become the consciousness, and so ideas process through linear sequences of events that seemingly present as the passage of time, of lifetimes, etc., and yet everything, all the idea agreements that make up the consciousness must be present in a true isness reality, which is everything, as an everything implies everything must be present within it, and so nowhere can there be anything disassociated with this everything. There can't be a distance, or time, motion, point-to-point travelling, etc., as there is nowhere to travel to. Everything is here and now, and in the isness, everything a true reality. And also where familiarity can stem from in regards to real side experiences, if we have no current personal self-memory lifetime reference for them, would be this real awareness that is through all consciousness. And so, as we stand more so in this real awareness position, everything we experience may well seem familiar, if they are ideas that are present now as the consciousness, but that we are only just now having the personal self shown. But with the past lifetime scenes that flare up from a tapline releasing, the personal self will have these files, these experiences recorded in its own data backup area, the Akashic files of the astral part of itself. And although subconscious, as each lifetime we have a new body vehicle and a new mind storage area devoid of references until we start collating new experiences, all that we have been through is stored and present, and is the consciousness that is constantly generating our projected, simulated experience, regardless of how unconscious we are of it. And so, some individuals can recollect past lifetimes, so-called, more so than others, depending on their consciousness and how they have decided as to its construction in regards to the ability to extract information from it that is aside from the current lifetime of memory references. And again, the real awareness has access to it all, and so the personal self can be shown certain experiences from other lifetimes where necessary, and if it makes awareness sense to do so, or the imagery may be as inadvertent, incidental simulation that effects from the ideas we are facing and releasing. And so we can learn to determine which experiences are these past lifetime flashbacks, these tapline facing experiences, as they tend be more vivid and retain better in the mind on waking, and the impressions through the real awareness will tend to add clarity as to exactly what it is we are experiencing. If it is a heads-up warning experience, an awareness-bolstering, guide-provided experience, or a tapline facing and releasing experience with the corresponding imagery and simulation, the simulation stemming from past lifetimes, which would then be somewhat secondary to the purpose of such an experience, that of tapline releasing, and we need not get too caught up with the experience, the simulation of it. This would be one such real-side experience, where in another lifetime dimensional position in creation, I would be an individual who had developed quite remarkable creational abilities, which really is simply the decision to do so, as that which we decide and agree with are ideas that become the consciousness and affect the nature of the ideas we have decided. So really, anything's possible in creation. It's just a case of deciding it, and assuming there are no conflicting idea agreements, conscious or subconscious, that oppose, hinder, or contradict the idea decided on. During that lifetime, it wasn't visually very clear exactly what I was doing or trying to achieve, but my intentions seemed sincere, as I had constructed some kind of vast complexity of buildings that served as beneficial to all that agreed to be a part of them. The sense was almost as though I had constructed them instantaneously, no labour or time required, just as ideas are instantly their effects in reality on the real side, and there's no reason why such can't be so on the physical. It's just a case of what has been decided through the consciousness of a species or individual, that of instant manifestation, or that it takes time, distance, and materials and labour to build. In some computer games, you have to have your character build a house. In others, you simply pop it into existence. Different consciousness dictating different simulated experiences. and this was one such area of creation, where the consciousness, presented as a limitation of the laborious necessity of building a construction, and yet I had the ability to instantly manifest on the physical. Again, it would have been how I had developed and decided as to my consciousness, with no conflicting subconscious ideas to the contrary. As such, I seemed to be occupying a position or post in that society that was afforded to the individual who had such ability, as though either few developed it, or it was an arranged situation through the consciousness of the species that one individual at a time would hold such a post and have such abilities available. The species itself was rather a mixed assortment of all manner of difficult to describe body forms, difficult from the personal self-storehouse of current lifetime references, and my abilities, the abilities of the individual who had such a posting, seemed pretty extensive, as I could fly through the air, etc., and really manipulate creation on the physical as I saw fit, whereas all other beings present in that dimensional area and place in creation were rather as limited as, say, a typical human. And again, we are only as limited as we decide, as our decided created consciousness dictates, as we cling to the unfaced agreements that make up its construction. The array of buildings I made manifest there seemed to be somehow educationally related, as though their function was to benefit the species and afford them knowledge that, like the abilities I had, the species didn't have access to, as though the one in my position could access more, suggesting a greater awareness that facilitated interdimensional delving of the ideas of creation, knowledge, etc., that could be brought through to the physical and utilized for the species' benefit. Although my abilities and my posting in the position I had was rather tainted by other, more dubious activities and life choices I had additionally decided and was involved with, as it seemed that despite my sincerity of intent, that of benefiting the species I was a part of, with that which I created and shared in regards to knowledge I brought through from the other dimensions of life, it was so that I was also an abuser of others, and that I had done my best to keep that darker side of myself a secret. However, it would seem that a moment came where I was exposed, and some of my physically abused victims would come forth and present their evidence for their accusations, evidently compelling enough that I was brought to justice as it was, and charged with my acts of abuse that I had been indulging in. For yes, throughout all our many lifetimes, we've all been the abusers, the abused, the murderers, the murdered, the dark forces, and the slaves. As we play in creation as we do, decide what we will, and really all of it is for comparison overall to recognise the is by. It's not so much about right or wrong, it's just decision, choice, cause, and the corresponding effects that result from it. All as ideas in a creation. Then we add further ideas, that of right or wrong, immoral, just, etc., etc., again adding ideas to already created and simulated effected ideas, until we're drowning in ideas layered upon ideas. Anyway, so it was that I was charged with my crimes, of which I had no defence. Watertight were the accusations, and so I was stripped of my position as the one who brought through the knowledge from the unseen life levels. Interestingly was the means by which this position was passed from one individual to another, for whatever reason this might occur, in my case, due to my dishonourable activities. For the one who had the position would be the one to pass it on to another, and so it would be that I would place my hand on the forehead of another, my successor, and the abilities I had were lost, and became now those of this new individual. Again, everything that occurs in a creation, all the particulars, the details, are what has been decided in the consciousness, with all involved who are in agreement, and so what transpired here, as it would be with the situations with any species, would be the agreements each respective species held to, and would be then their effected, simulated reality. Because I had committed crimes that were deemed punishable by death, so it was I would be executed, and so, stripped of my position and abilities, the species' particular method and means of execution was that they would unleash into the room, a kind of courtroom setting, if you will, where my judgment had been passed, a swarm of miniature robotic-like particles into the air, and they would be calibrated to zero in on my particular genetic profile, and so I was engulfed in this cloud of swirling robotic particles, like perhaps nano-dust, for want of a better term, and when the cloud dispersed, so was I inflicted now with a slow deteriorating malaise that would culminate in my death. I would deteriorate in relatively comfortable conditions, however, a kind of bed, etc., and be confronted with all those I had abused, as seemed to be the custom with the species, and also all those I had a friendship and affiliation with, including a female partner, would be allowed to visit and bid me farewell, although most were not too impressed with my choice of activity outside of my assigned interdimensional knowledge-acquiring duties. And so, on the surface, just another decided happening in creation, another lifetime where choices were made and the effects followed. The experience would have been stored then subconsciously as further lifetimes were assumed, and as with all ideas created and agreed with, that formulates our effected simulation, so these would be ideas held to, and be always effecting and projecting according to their nature, along with all other ideas that are constantly decided and added to the consciousness, in whatever ways they might. But not only do we then hold to all the ideas of the lifetimes we effected for ourselves, but we tend enhance them with emotional reaction and consideration. We charge them with additional ideas, generally emotionally sensation-based astral vehicle generated ideas, such as joy, hate, fear, guilt, shame, etc. There was a real side experience I once had, where I had betrayed an individual, stolen the secrets she had amassed, and as she was a powerful witch, she had killed me as a consequence. That was another past lifetime, but what I had installed, in addition to the experience, was the consideration, the idea, that every time I acquire a positioning that my personal self considers significant, that I go into a kind of self-destruct mode, which stemmed from the distorted idea I had applied in addition to the experience, that as I claimed my secrets in that lifetime, so it culminated in my death, and this rather installed an agreement program that every time I assume a significant position, so I self-sabotage, and that was a tapline that I had to face and release, or it would, as all agreements will, reoccur and play out again in creation. As we program our consciousness, as we hold to everything it contains, including the emotional ideas we have applied in addition to the experiences, so we go constantly through the simulation of that which we have decided, that which makes up the ideas of the consciousness. And although subconscious to these ideas in subsequent lifetimes, so we might well come into certain affected situations and find ourselves self-sabotaging and perhaps not understanding why we are motivated to do such. And although we have constructed the consciousness in whatever way we have, we can stand aside from the pull and tug of its programming. The personal self will want what it has decided as to its thrills and inclination, etc. It is still a consciousness of compulsions that we have to deal with and handle, the consciousness construction, and the more we stand in the nowness of the real awareness, the more we can disregard the personal self, and these compulsions will lessen. But as you can imagine, for those fully immersed in the consciousness personal self, so would such compulsions be all-encompassing. They would be more so driven by their self-destructive urges, if such had been decided on and installed as idea files that have the consciousness then programmed along these lines. This then was a similar past lifetime experience, where having made the choices I had, so had the effects rolled out accordingly, agreement to the particular social consciousness had me go through experience that such agreements dictated, including the stripping of my abilities, and execution for what were considered crimes that warranted such. Species throughout creation will differ in what they consider punishable by death crimes. Just look at some of the justifications for death penalties on the earth alone. In some places, a woman can be raped, and she is stoned to death as the guilty party, for example. And then, as I expired, as I transitioned, so would I hold to the guilt and shame sensation, emotional ideas I created in addition to the situation, and these I rather charged the experience with, and it was thus a package of ideas that became part of the consciousness. Very likely then, that should a similar experience be so, the guilt and shame that was added to the original experience would likely come to the fore, and I would be confused as to the origins of such, and emotion, like any idea, would effect as it would into a further experience that reflected the nature of the emotion. There have been real side experiences where certain individuals have been able to access these past lifetimes of mine and rather present them to me, particularly those lifetimes where my actions would be considered abrasive or unsavoury, and with the intent then of eliciting emotional reaction in response, or to reignite the emotional reaction that was created and stored with the experience during the lifetime it took place. For anything we create, through the vehicles of the created self, the thoughts, emotions, will pull us from the nowness of the real awareness position, a real awareness position where on the real side we are at our most capable as the extent of our releasing of agreements through the consciousness that dictate otherwise allow, as the real awareness can more so deal with any situation and individual, bring whatever abilities are needed to bear, and access what of the overall consciousness of ideas as they effect into a simulation that are required to get through all simulated situations. But should we stand in the personal self, if we activate the thoughts and emotions, then we are locked into the consciousness. We are removed from the real awareness position, and our capability is based on what the personal self knows through its current lifetime memory of references. And although our capability in regards to others is agreement dependent, and so, with agreements released, so those that were able to dominate us no longer are able to, with the personal self alone, how would we know how to utilize portals and the various mechanics of creation, for example, should we be engaging with such? Whereas, with the real awareness standing, we just simply breeze through these decided consciousness into a simulation mechanics with effortless ease. And so, as I said, I have found that certain ill-intended beings will draw my attention to these lifetimes in an effort to have me immersed in the personal self through my emotional reaction, guilt, shame, etc., and thus I am more vulnerable, absent of my real awareness standing. And so, this is what would occur next. for I would be in a kind of school setting, and although not one of the Unuversal Unuversities on this occasion, my impressions as to its representation was that of the continued process of awareness, as very often this is revealed or verified, our intent to continue with it, presented as a school-type settings, with the guides often in attendance, and as we go through school gradings, so this represents our awareness becoming more so, like graduating through the endless steps required to recognize the ears, and then forever onwards into its endless recognition. And indeed, an individual I used to be associated with, a fellow school student from this lifetime, would be present, an individual called Keith, and this is a form often assumed by the real guides, especially in a school-like awareness becoming representing scenarios, and with the Keith being one who is a personal self immersed, so would his real side behaviour reflect this consciousness limited positioning, and so just what these individuals are doing alone would indicate to an extent if they are the genuine individuals, or if the forms are assumed by others, and naturally a real guide would be rather apparent in their actions alone, regardless of their outward forms. But they also have a certain signature about them, that as they recognise the ears, so our real awareness can determine this is recognising a signature, as the real awareness is a part of the ears, the guide's real awareness also is, and this signature can only be determined by the real awareness, as the personal self only deals in the simulation surface view. The personal self is part of creation, and has nothing to do with the ears, and so can't determine is recognising signatures that only are to be found in the true reality aside from creational simulation, that only the real awareness that is a part of the ears can read. And the real awareness, again, if stood in the nowness reality of, will afford impressions as to these unique is recognising signatures that the guides and certain individuals have, such as Dwayne, etc., that we can always realise we are in the guide's presence, despite the outward adopted forms. And on this occasion, Keith would indeed be a real guide, as per real awareness verification impressions, and as guides adopting Keith's form generally do when in school-type settings and scenes, so would he be in the role more so of a teacher, or really what is a facilitator of our awareness process, as we so agree with the guides that they can take us through this process. And during this scene, suddenly individuals would burst into the classroom, and a little like as I described, as to how beings with the ability will sometimes present lifetimes with the intent to draw me into the personal self through emotional reaction, so would these characters similarly make reference and bring to my awareness the past lifetime I had previously recounted, which had with it the emotionally charged additional ideas of guilt and shame. The idea was this: to draw me into the personal self, and so removing from the real awareness position would have me limited to the capabilities available through the personal self only, the references collated this lifetime, and the further idea was then to launch an attack upon me. These individuals were affiliated with the dark forces, and as I have often described, any inability to deal with individuals is through agreements we hold to in regards to that individual, that whenever or by what circumstances the agreements were made, dictate if an individual can dominate, harm us, etc., or not. And so the process of awareness is a releasing of these agreements that have us more so untouchable by anyone in creation. For if I hold no agreements that another can harm me, these are idea files that are the consciousness that effect simulation where I can't be harmed by others. Just as we would program a computer game with the abilities of all the characters in relation to each other. And even if I am then personal self immersed momentarily through activation of the body vehicles, my overall intent and choice is that of a releasing and a maintained release of all the agreements of the consciousness, and so still I would be more capable than had I never released a single tapline, or if I had, say, decided to step back from the process of awareness, which is then a decision to be locked fully into the consciousness, which is a full agreement therefore with it, and the agreements it contains, re-establishing the taplines once again, in other words, including those in relation to other individuals and their power over us, etc. And so, regardless of this effort, which had me rather switching between the personal self and the real awareness position, as the emotions in regards to the past lifetime brought to my attention by the dark force agents would wax and wane as to their impact, as to my ability to be indifferent to them, and during which I was under attack by hordes of various dark force agents. But despite this inability to retain real awareness standing consequently, evidently released were agreements regarding these attackers which dictated any ability on their part to harm me as I defended myself successfully. The scene would switch to where, still accompanied by the real guide in Keith's form and another individual whose impressions revealed was another individual on his awareness process, we were in a kind of high-tech facility which seemed to have the capability to exact consciousness alterations, and although really alterations in the consciousness are simply decisions and agreements we decide that make such alterations so, and alterations in the consciousness idea files must effect then altered experience. There are many variables and factors involved, and sometimes I have encountered beings with the ability to alter the consciousness of others, sometimes beneficially, sometimes ill-intended beings, and so detrimentally, again as agreements dictate that they can do so. And it seems a consciousness can be altered technologically, as after all, it is all just mechanics, and very much like a computer, so as agreements from the computer operator permits, so can computer files, the idea agreements, be altered, deleted, replaced, adjusted, and the corresponding simulation be effected in accordance. And this seemed a situation where this place existed, this technological facility on the real side, where such adjustments could be made, and as orchestrated by the real guide. Or it may have been an over-exaggerated representation simply of this consciousness alteration, that would then stick more so in the memory on awaking, but my impressions were in fact it was an actual place, and the consciousness adjustments were in regards to the past lifetime experience, whereby, as I agreed, so would the idea agreements, the emotional, additionally created, decided on, and filed ideas in association with that lifetime would be erased, and thus, when confronted with this again, this lifetime, if this was to occur again, so would no emotional flare-up be automatically triggered that had me pulled from the real awareness, or the back and forth between the personal self and the real awareness that I described. Or perhaps it was an agreement releasing of all taplines associated with the past lifetime overall, expressing in this manner, and indeed all agreements must be released if we want to be removed from the necessity of a creation, but perhaps it was timely to do it at this moment, as this was the very agreement taplines that were resulting in me being in a more precarious, pulled from the nowness of the real awareness position during this particular attack, as sometimes we release agreements on the fly, as it were, as we come across certain situations that if we don't, we can't proceed, as the agreements we hold to will dictate what transpires next, will not be easily executed or flow with any ease, or even able to occur. And this other individual with us, evidently, was in a similar situation, and releasing these limiting agreements which dictated situations or individuals that he was unable to handle or deal with. Interestingly, he was in the form of the master character from Doctor Who would be the Doctor's arch-enemy, and in the series had adopted this master title for himself. Perhaps an indication of the sort of tapline agreement or attachment this individual was releasing. Maybe something regarding the attachment to a created position where he had had such a title or distinction. But also this facility was not only able to be utilised for the releasing of limiting taplines, but also of endowing us with greater creational abilities seemingly, through the alterations in the consciousness that must effect, as I said, altered simulated experience. And in regards to abilities, so can these potentially be installed, just as you would add extra powers to your computer game character in any commercial computer game, as you add the programming to the game that facilitates such. And these abilities were along the lines of those I once had in the past lifetime I initially shared. So maybe a case of just reigniting ideas of the subconscious, as that which we have done and developed before are always easier to re-establish, like riding a bike, as they say. And perhaps it was deemed as making sense that these abilities be re-established with myself and this other individual, orchestrated by the real guide, and so this was not a personal self-decision to do such. It wasn't a thrill-seeking, orientated pursuit, but more so something the guide deemed a necessity for whatever reason at this time, and however this may translate through to simulation, real side, or on the physical. The consciousness alterations only just completed when the facility was raided by more waves of dark force attackers, still intent on their attack efforts, although at this moment I was standing in the nowness of my real awareness, with all emotional idea additions to the prior lifetime now removed, and so unable to be pulled into the personal self through emotions no longer present and stored as the consciousness. The attacking waves all took the form of various types of robots, cyborgs, and combinations of organic and mechanical mishmashes of body form. The other individual and myself defended ourselves with ease, as no agreements were evidently in place that dictated we could be harmed by these attackers, despite their vast numbers, and we had rather a sci-fi-like battle, with laser fire and such, back and forth. Eventually, we had the attacking robot Dark Force horde bested, as no more waves of attackers would enter the scene, but impressions revealed more were on the way, so we retreated from this facility through an underground series of cave-like systems which led us to safety, rather than engage endlessly with relentless waves of dark force robotic agents, regardless of our ability to handle them. But as it transpired, there was another reason for our retreat, as a very capable dark force agent had been deployed, and this being I and my companion both harboured agreements with, that allowed he could bestow harm upon us, and the particulars of the agreement were such that it couldn't be just released on the spot, as some can, and we do occasionally come up against adversaries during our real side activities, where they are initially indomitable, but we can instantly drop the agreement that makes them so, in relation to ourselves. But perhaps on this occasion the agreement was rather more complex, as all agreements differ in the ease of their releasing, according to the individual, the agreement's nature, emotional attachment components, etc. Whatever the reason might be as to the making of a more convoluted agreement, we couldn't just drop this agreement, and so had to rather retreat from this particular dark force agent. He pursued us relentlessly across the multi-dimensions of creation seemingly, and at one point would capture my associate, and again I can only assist where agreement parameters allow in regards to the plights of others. That I couldn't assist him indicated no such agreements were forthcoming that would allow me to do so, and so I proceeded to retreat onwards alone. I fled across a number of open countryside fields, where the two types of animals they contained consisted of a kind of a buffalo and a pride of lions, and they would attack me also, the animals endowed with the ability to verbally speak. These animals were other minions of the dark forces, as were my impressions, and their body types expressing, as per their consciousness, as it currently stands. Many unaware and continuously unconscious beings do express as more animal-like in their forms on the real side, sometimes as walking, talking beast creatures, sometimes in full animal form. For as individuals become more unconscious, limited, and more restricted through the consciousness ideas they agree with and create, so their positioning in creation and body type reflects this escalating self-limitation. And although these are effects they are projecting for themselves that are yet to play out in a simulation on the physical, everything is as it is now on the real side, and so dark force abrasive and attitude-driven individuals, through their continued self-limitation and that of others, can be as animals on the real side. And there have been a number of real side experiences where I have been attacked by animals that have been the forms of dark force agents, etc. I would navigate my way through the dark force animals, evading the lions and buffalo, with the formidable agent still in pursuit. Up ahead was a street that I was trying to reach, and my impressions were that my house resided there, and was my intended target, as though a representation of the intention of making further idea agreement consciousness adjustments that would improve my situation as it pertained to my pursuer, who, through agreements I still had unreleased, dictated his formidable nature in regards to myself. As the physical, level, recreated house on the real side does represent the consciousness, and much by way of experiences involving the facing of the created self, and the releasing of the taplines has taken place as real side experiences involving my house as the overall scene in the various ways that it has. For the idea is to face the created self, the consciousness, and all of creation. You can't run from it, for where are you running to? These are agreements that will keep on giving, effects that will keep on manifesting until faced and released, and you could conceivably be running from what you had in fact created for yourself for eternity in the created simulators. And so retreating would be so, in this experience, for a few moments, until I reached my house, and would make the necessary facing and releasing of the agreements associated with this effected situation, as though the convoluted nature of the agreements pertaining to my pursuer were such that it wasn't an instantaneous releasing, and so this expressed as a chase scene until the agreements could be deconstructed, and there the experience would end, and I never reached my house, but my impressions were, even though this, the personal self, wasn't shown, that I did what was required, released further agreements, and rendered another dark force agent, as formidable as he was harmless, to myself at any rate. So the overall takeaway was a further verification of the process of awareness, the facing of the created self and creation, becoming fully conscious of all the agreement ideas and attachments the consciousness comprises of, then deciding their release, that we are no longer the unconscious effects of anything, and we can complete this process if we have the intent to see it through, and along the way all the various elements, variables, past lifetime glimpses, additional emotional charged reactions we apply to the experiences, and the dealings with all the various dark forces in all their myriad of forms.